Welcome everyone to another BlockU animation toolkit walkthrough. There's a few things I want to talk about today. We have a new free update for the pack. The update consists of some extra shapes and also a flag building folder. There's another promo up where the American flag builds on. There's also a promo where the icon logo becomes a vehicle badge. So let's get into it. Firstly, I'll talk about this logo here, how this was created. The promo itself begins with certain parts of this logo sort of building on and creating, giving the impression that this logo is slowly being created. But those sections that you see in the promo in the beginning are just shapes from the actual pack. This logo is created slightly differently, so there's a bit of a cheat going on in that last shot, but it opens up a lot of different possibilities. So as you can see, it's a 3D shape. And the whole thing can build on. You'll see that there's no depth to it except for the grid in the background. But the grid and this plane follows, breaks up into squares and follows a mat, really. The shape of this logo that I created in Photoshop. So let's just jump in and have a bit of a look at how that was created. So here we are in Element. If you're unfamiliar with the pack is just a collection of shapes and planes and 3D objects that have been broken up via their wireframe or through a fracture process. Some of the shapes also come with their own particular wireframe as well. Let's just grab a square. So I want to create, I might have this image here, and I want that dancer to build on in the scene. So this square here, if we go into wireframe, made up of individual squares, and these individual squares can be taken into the animation engine and they can build on in various different ways. And this square is made up of 3 different sections. You've got a top plane, you've got the sides of all those squares, then you've got the lower plane, and of course none of these have got their back faces showing. So what I would do is clear off these and just have the one plane. I would need to come down and activate this checkbox, draw back faces. So now I've got a plane that can be seen from all different angles. And I'll come back down to this in a minute. I need to add that image here to the diffuse channel. I need to come back down to the forced opacity, the threshold level, and although Element at this point isn't specifically designed for this, you can walk this in and just get the edges as clean as you want. You can prepare the edges a little bit better in Photoshop. But what you have now is an image here that can build on. Let's just get that out of the folder. It's on by default for me. We will rotate this. Degrees. So here we have the dancer, and all we have to do then is duplicate the model, put that on group 2, click OK. Group 1, particle look, multi-object, yes. Size 0, maybe bit of random rotation. You don't always have to activate multi-object for the second layer. That's good practice. Turn on the animation engine and adjust all this accordingly. And you have now an image that will come on in 3D space, build on, any way that you want. Might be radial. Just drop that a little bit. And build it on from a direction just by adjusting the position X, Y. I'm able to make it build from the bottom left-hand corner. Follow the progression of the image. A lot of possibilities. All right. So basically I did the same thing for the logo. Let's get rid of this. Come down and choose a rectangle. And we'll do the same thing. Clear off these two. Draw back faces. I might just start the process here. Find our image. You can see here that it's just a white image with a transparent background. If you want to apply your own textures to the shape, it really helps just to have a white shape. And here we are. So you can adjust and make sure that you're getting nice clean edges. I've still got draft textures on. Let's just change that. And there's my logo ready to be built on. So you can throw on a metal throw on a metal texture. But the diffuse slot has already been taken up. So you need, sorry for jumping around. What I like to do here is just simply add it to one of these. That way when I come into the scene, it's there ready to be taken advantage of. Copy it. And I can come into this texture group and just paste that into glossiness and reflection, and just adjust these settings and just get the look that you want. Let's just say we're happy with that, and we have our logo. Usually when I'm building something, I always put it in a group folder. That way I'm not worried about how I'm going to animate it right now. All I'm worried about is being able to see it all in one place within this viewport, and making sure that everything is aligned and fits well. So in the promo, as you saw in the beginning of this video, it had a grid in the back. So let's just add that to the group as well. So now we're operating on this grid. Let's just make sure that's in the right place. It's too close. We want it sitting just behind the logo. It has one material. You can throw the same material on. I usually duplicate it so that it has its own settings if I need to adjust them individually, as opposed to adjusting everything universally. I rename it, and then I can just bring that on. It has its transparency settings, the same as the logo, and interestingly, it just sort of cuts right through it. And you now have the shape of the logo cut into the grid. Okay, let's just say I'm happy with that. I come back here. I can see everything in the viewport. I'm happy with the logo. Now I need to decide, how am I going to animate this? Am I going to animate this as a one unit, as a single model? Or do I want, as I did in the promo, I had the grid animating on slightly ahead of the logo itself. That means I have to put everything into their own layers and animate them separately, and have two separate instances of element on the one layer back in After Effects. I can't see everything in there, but I know everything's set out correctly. Now, at the moment, we're working on one instance of element, but I need two instances. The first instance, I'm going to be animating the grid on first, slightly ahead of the logo. So I'm focusing on the grid first. I have one grid shape on group 1, another grid shape on group 2. I'm going to be animating between group 1 and group 2, but I can't have these on the same groups. So I just need to get rid of them and just disable them, so this element instance isn't concerned with them. But I need them there as so that when I copy and paste element as an instance, these will still be intact. So, as we expected, the grid is on first in this instance. I need to edit, duplicate. Now I have a second instance of element. I can rename those. And in this second instance, I'm going to go back, reactivate those slots. 1, 2, do the reverse. Okay. In the first instance, you need to come down to here and check unified so that your final instance is what is controlling the rendering aspects, but the animation controls are relevant to their own instance. Then you would go into your different instances and decide how you're going to animate these. Let's just reset these. You would put in your keyframes. Hit U and you'll get your keyframes. Animate these as you wish. Let's reactivate that. Keyframe. Now I have two sets of keyframes. I know the top one is the grid, the bottom one is the logo shape itself. I can see I need to reset. And you can adjust these as you want, of course. Okay. Once you're happy with the way it builds on, then choose your camera angle and set your animation. Alright, so let's just reset everything. Okay, so let's just talk about the updates. We have a flag building folder. Now all I've done in here is I had a look at a collection of flags, and they all are very different, but most of them are made up from geometric shapes and strips and stripes. They have really only two forms of stars, 5-pointed and 7-pointed. So different shapes, different strips and stripes. that will help you create any flag that you want. As you saw in the US flag demo, simply made up of the various shapes. But let's just, which is easy enough, you just sort of place them where you want. That's your flag base. You have various quads. Let's just put that in a folder. Normally creating from top down. So with the US flag, created the base, then I used another base on top of that. This quad over here for the blue quadrant, and then added the stars individually. The stars are a collection of, you've got flat stars like this, that some are fractured and split up via their wireframes. So some are flat, some are actually fractured and have more volume to them. Some are just solid. You may not want these stars to build on from a fractured object. You may simply, as in the demo, I simply had a solid star. That star was, I might just change the color of that. That star was moved into position. The scale was changed. And then I duplicated and created a group of the stars. And then when I animated it, I created two groups of those stars to animate from one group to the next. And in the demo, one group of stars was off camera. The second group of stars was in position, and as you saw in the demo, they flew in one by one. So you have a group of shapes that are all relatively the same, size in wireframe. Just helps with conformity and just a cleaner end result with everything roughly the same size. So let's just get rid of that for a moment. So we have a flag base. The national flags that are out there are generally made up of geometric shapes and colors and stripes. And then some of them actually have design work. They actually have images. For example, the Union Jack. For England, the Union Jack covers the entire flag. For countries like Australia or New Zealand, the Union Jack is in the corner. Other countries have the Union Jack as well. So likewise, other countries have logos or words or something of that description on the flag somewhere. So how do you go about creating that? Well, the same idea as we had with the logo and with the dancer, you can add your images to one of the planes, because they're built up the same way. So you can add your image to the top layer, any image that you want. I can add the Union Jack directly to this if I want. Excuse me. Come back up here. And there I have my Union Jack. But what if I want to be a little bit more creative? Just clear that. Back to our white. Let's give that a blue again. Bring in another base. Let's just bring that up a bit so we can see what we're doing. Same as with the dancer and with the logo, bring in your logo with a transparent background. Come down to drawback faces. Come back up to alpha threshold. Let's just get rid of these. And there you have your logo on a separate layer. So you may, if you change the scale of that, you'll notice that the wireframe and everything gets smaller and it doesn't help with a unified look. So that's why I added some of these quadrants. Wrong one. Do the same to this. Okay, we're happy with the position. So we're doing an Australian flag or a New Zealand flag. Draw back faces. Get our transparency. And there you have the beginnings of an Australian flag or another country that has the Union Jack. And this is on a separate layer. It doesn't have to use transparency, but that just gives you some options as far as animating the way you want to animate it on. So in the case of the US flag, I simply had a base where I threw on a galvanized metal, actually. Then actually I had a grid in the background. So we can give that a color as well. So in the US flag demo, I had a grid in the background. I had another layer for the flag base. Then I added a strip. And I had to put that into its own group because there's a few of these. Alt left click will produce another copy. And I just went through and added the stripes of the US flag. Then I positioned them all correctly. Then I chose every second one and put them into their own group. So that I could have different colors. So Shift Alt, you can choose them in your scene. Then I actually dropped one slightly lower than the other. Positioned the quadrant, added the stars, and all of that was in one group. Once I was happy with the makeup of the model, I then had to decide how I was going to animate this, what parts were going to animate on first, what groups that I needed, and that would determine how many instances of element that I needed, and would determine how I break this up. So I duplicate the solid base, duplicate the grid. I would duplicate this folder. I would put the red stripes into a different folder, the blue stripes into a different folder. I would then duplicate those two folders, duplicate this solid here. The stars would all be in one folder, then I would duplicate that folder. And then, as you saw before, I would go through and decide which one I was going to animate first, put that on group 1 and 2, and the rest on 3 and 4, and then disabled them and hit OK. And that would be my first instance of element. Then I would duplicate element, have a second instance, rename that to whatever it was going to contain, come back into element here, and then, as you saw before, changed what was going to be the focus of the animation in that instance of element. Okay, so let's just have a look at the project file for the US flag. You can see here that I've got 6 instances of element. If we have a look at the setup, as I showed you with the vehicle logo, I've gone through and I've created my flag in one folder. Made sure I was happy with the way it looked, with spacing, textures, And then I've decided, okay, how am I going to animate this structure? What parts do I want together in one folder? What parts do I want separated out? What parts are going to animate before other parts? And so I've gone along and I've decided, okay, I need the grid to animate as one, the flag solid to animate as one object, the stars as a group to animate as an object, the upper quad to animate by itself, and in the process I wanted the stripes to grow on in two waves. So I've gone along and I've moved those into their respective folders, if they required folders. As with the stripes, they require the folders, a folder structure, the red stripes, so on. The quad itself doesn't require a folder. The flag grid doesn't require its folder, and so on. In this first instance, I've decided I want the grid to animate on first. So I've just thrown everything on groups 3 and 4 and my target object into group 1 and 2 and turn them on. That's my first instance. I've named it grid. I've gone back. I've duplicated that element instance. Then I've come back into it. I've got the same structure, but this time my focus is this grid base. So I put that on groups 1 and 2, put everything else, I put the grid on 3 and 4, along with everything else, disabled the grid, turned the solid on, come back in, duplicated that, created stripes group 1, stripes group 2, so on and so on. And then when I'm in After Effects, that's when I decide how and when these elements transition on. So as an idea, I've got, it's difficult to see, but you can't actually, the grid is there transitioning on. We can actually see clearly in this top view is the base transitioning on. And I've decided that I want to follow the animation growing from the far back corner forward. The camera pulls back, and as this sweeps across, the camera does a sweep, starts to focus on this section of the quad starting to come on, knowing that the stars are going to come in from behind the camera actually. And as everything starts to transition on, the camera pulls back so that the viewer can see that what has been building so far is actually a flag. Most of the animation of the grid, the base and the stripes are all animating on from this top corner. And you control that knowing that it's a directional animation, and you can adjust the horizontal and vertical aspects so that you can adjust basically the direction that it comes from in a 360-degree aspect. So I've been able to maneuver the direction that this is coming from that corner. I've put the stripes animating on in a similar direction. Then I've spaced out the keyframes for each instance of element to animate at certain times. The first group of stripes animates on, then the second group of stripes begins to animate on, and when the camera is in this position, I've got the quad animating in a certain way. The flag base, the stripes, the grid, both groups that are animating are in the same position. All that's changing is the size of these particles and their orientation. So they're growing on from nothing and then twisting and turning and falling into place. This quad, however, is actually, I can just get this in place. The position of group 1 is different to the position of group 2. Group 2 is in its final destination. Group 1 is actually elevated. And from here it looks as though the pieces are falling into place, not just appearing to turn and grow in scale and become the object. I've actually moved the object in group 1 above so that it animates down and as though it's falling into place. Similar with the stars, group 2 is in its final destination. Group 1 is manipulated to the point where it's behind the camera. Now, if you're almost happy with your animation, but something is not quite right, maybe there's an object that is obscuring the camera, or something's just off, one of the pieces is in the wrong place, you don't need to start over. All you need to do is come down to the position noise, usually of the first group, so group 1, and just to change this random seed to something else. So it hasn't made a lot of difference here, but it has changed the rotation of these objects. So that may be just enough to shift it out of the way so that your camera or just the composition is changed slightly and more appealing and more of what you want. So if you're 99% happy with your animation and you just need to tweak something, just play around with this random seed in the position noise and you may just get what you need from that. Now, once I'm happy with the animation, that's when I start focusing on the lighting. I'll find the light, work between two views, and I'll manipulate these lighting sources so that the reflection or the specularity hits the camera just where I need it to hit to highlight a certain area. That really informs the eye of the three-dimensional quality or the quality of the texture that I'm trying to bring out or something like that. So once I'm happy with the animation, that's really where I start to focus in on the lighting. From the start, I've had a basic 3-point lighting setup, but at this point, this is where I shift those lights around, where I add lights, delete lights for every camera shot. Now, this is one continuous shot, so I've just got to be careful that where I place the lights isn't going to interfere with other aspects of the shot. So I find the light that I want to adjust, or I find the place where I think this is where I need to show the viewer the quality of the texture, or in this case, not only do I want the texture to show, but I also want to highlight this depth here, and to highlight that these alternate stripes are actually lower than the other. So I just want to highlight the three-dimensional aspect of the flag as well. And I've kind of found for myself that when it comes to lighting and just adding a realistic touch to it, I subtly blow out some of these lights, because lighting isn't, you know, even the best lighting engineer, light can be, it's organic, really. So in a three-dimensional application, you want some of those imperfections coming through. So with some of these light sources, sometimes I just slightly blow it out a little bit just to add that imperfection. And then once I am mostly satisfied with it, then there's the final touches. There's the vignette and optical flares. Okay, so let's just have a look at what's in the update itself. We've already spoken about the flag builder, which is here. The update includes the letters, uppercase, lowercase, and the symbols as well. I just found that with the letters that are fractured, they're okay, but when you're viewing the letter from a distance, it gets a little bit hard to see what's going on, because there's a lot of fractured objects involved in each letter. So I've refractured the alphanumerics into only 3 or 4 pieces. Makes it easier to see what's going on from a distance. So I've got a folder here of extra shapes. This is just a collection of high poly shapes broken up into their squares and grids that are high poly. I've got a shape there that's 16 by 9 to help with video. Just some shapes that are thicker, so that when they're broken up, they actually, instead of forming plates or planes, they actually form cubes. So that might come in handy. Some rings, blocks, but any of the shapes that cut up into rings, that say rings here, sphere rings, square rings, anything that's being cut up into rings, I'll show you what that means. So here we have a cube. The cube has all its sides allocated to different material slots. Let's have a look. Allocate some images. You got the top, we'll just color them. Now they're made up of rings, and each ring has got a material for the part of the rings, the inner ring and the top and lower part of the ring. Okay, so there's our model. We'll duplicate that and hit OK. Okay. So group 1, particle look, multi-object, group 2, again, the object, and we want to rotate, say 180 degrees for this example. I'll just add some ambient. Animation engine. Okay, so this is what it means whenever you see an object there that has been cut up into rings. You'll get this effect. You can imagine what you could do with that. Radial. So that's effectively what you would have. Any of the objects that have been cut up into rings gives you that kind of flexibility with a shape. So I'm sure those updates will come in handy. Keep an eye out for more updates. My name is Martin Staley. Thanks for watching.